I am not John Laughlin. I believe he is in transit and might parachute in at some point. So this is the Forum and Friends. My name is Germ, and I'm joined by Peter Lavelle in Moscow. And we will drive things just until our guest arrives in a few minutes' time. She, I believe, there was a bit of a hiccup with the times. But I mean, Peter, you and I can start things off. You know, we can go back to 2020, which is what Debbie Lerman from the Brownstone Institute will be chatting to us. What actually happened in 2020 with the corona outbreak, and more specifically with Donald Trump. You know, what actually went down in the White House? Because I remember, I don't know if you remember, Peter, but you remember when the whole thing started breaking, and we heard that it was northern Italy or Wuhan, China, and then suddenly Trump decided to what is it, block commercial flights between America and China, and everybody called him a racist. And then the World Health Organization a few weeks later recommended exactly that, and the whole world did that. And then suddenly Trump was vindicated. What do you think actually went down in the White House? Let's just start there.
Well, I think that's a really difficult. I think there was a panic, obviously, and when you're panicking, you want to err on the side of safety for people. There, Susan Rice, when she was leaving the White House, the last days of the Obama administration, she was asked, and it's very peculiar. It's part of the public record here, what she worried about, and she said she worried about the breakout of a pandemic, which is very odd, kind of out of the blue for most of us. What I think, in retrospect, what I think was thinking about is that whatever happens are going to tie it to Donald Trump. And I think the entire COVID response, in retrospect, it's very problematic for Donald Trump because his base was and is still outraged by the COVID lockdowns and the quarantines and all of that. But he had his what was it, warp speed vaccine and all that. And
But he opposed lockdowns, eh?
What?
He opposed the lockdowns.
Yes, and plus for everyone to understand, I don't know if it's even legally possible for the president of the United States to lock down the country, because it's a republic of states. It's all about states. And Trump more or less did a good job in saying, I didn't do anything. The governors did all of this, which is true. Okay. But the mistake I think he made all through the so-called crisis is he stood next to Fauci. That was his biggest mistake. He was, and it was twofold. He was too deferential to Fauci, but he owned it. I mean, he as a politician, he made a very, very big mistake in doing that. And it looks like we just got a message here that Debbie is here. Hopefully she's going to, there she goes. There she is. There she is. Debbie to the rescue for me. Go ahead,
Debbie
Joe.
Lerman. Debbie Lerman, it's so nice to see you again and chat to you again.
You too.
I must quickly tell you, let me tell you a quick story, Peter, about Debbie. So a few years ago, Debbie wrote this incredible analysis of what she was, uncovering, what happened with Trump in the White House. And I wanted her on my radio show at that stage. And she said, maybe, I need to put out a disclaimer that, I'm not in the same headspace as you. And then a few weeks ago, when Debbie came onto my podcast, she's like, I'm completely in the same headspace. What happened, Debbie?
Why could there have been a different headspace then and not now?
I back then was just starting to investigate what happened. I had never been in any, I had never investigated any so-called conspiracy theories before. So I did not want to be necessarily affiliated or sort of in the same head. I wasn't in the same headspace as people who had been doing this for a long time. because I'm not an investigative journalist, or at least I wasn't until I started investigating. And I wasn't in the sort of world of people who were investigating conspiracy theories. And I didn't really ever want to know anything about the CIA or the FBI or the National Security Council.
Debbie, you
I never wanted to know anything about them.
But you weren't investigating a conspiracy. You were investigating the truth. There's a big difference. I've been in that place a number of times over the years. And what was called a conspiracy theory maybe 2 or 3 years ago, 5 years ago, is commonplace, accepted knowledge and reality.
I would argue, Peter, that argue that it was a conspiracy because, as Debbie, sorry, I'm a bit sick, so please forgive me. Trump was conspired against.
Okay, yeah, I believe that 100%. Keep going.
Again, I would qualify what you were just saying when I entered the studio, as far as Trump being on the outside and everybody conspiring against him. I would challenge that notion.
Sure.
I think, yes, indeed, he's not on the inner circle of the national security state for sure. And they don't like him because he might want to do some things that they don't want to do. And he might not want to go along with the wars the way that they go along with them. Although I think it's pretty easy to convince him to do things. And I think he's pretty easily swayed by the last person who talks to him. And I think what happened was he was convinced by the national security state that this was a dangerous bioweapon and that we had to lock everything down. I think he also loves to take credit for things, and I think he loves to take credit for Operation Warp Speed. I don't think he.
So Debbie, you're saying that this, at least is particularly, at least for me, this is new, is that this was they convinced them it was a bio weapon and from China.
No, not from, so China, so there are two boogeymen, there are two limited hangouts, and I'm sorry to use that term, I know it's really overused, but there are two ways to deflect people from looking at what actually happened during COVID. And those two things are: one, blame Fauci; two, blame China. It wasn't Fauci and it wasn't China. They were part of it, both of them, Fauci and China, but they were not to blame. And when I say they told him it was a bioweapon, now this is conjecture because we don't know what they told him.
Okay.
But what the reason that I make this conjecture is that it wasn't just Trump. There were a bunch of leaders like Boris Johnson, people around the world who didn't want to go along or didn't even think that we needed lockdowns because they were being advised correctly by epidemiologists and scientists who said, this is not how we do it. But then they all switched in the middle of March. I mean, there's a few days in which the entire world switched.
I remember.
And I believe that the reason that they switched, so I know what happened before the switch. I know what happened after the switch. I don't know what was whispered in their ears to make the switch happen. My conjecture is that they said to them, a very dangerous or potentially dangerous engineered virus escaped from a lab where they make engineered viruses, and it could kill millions of people if you don't lock down and wait for the vaccine.
Yeah.
That's it. That was the plan. Lock down and wait till the vaccine. So they convinced Trump that way. They convinced Boris Johnson that way. They also told them that. Say that again?
Every president, ours also.
Yeah, every president. I mean, there were some WEF presidents like Macron and like in Canada who were already on board with the whole thing.
Of course he was.
What?
Of course he was. Okay.
Yeah,
any chance to take civil liberties away, he's first in line.
And Trudeau. I mean, there were some people who were already kind of in the global leadership space where I think some of the planning was going on. So I'm not sure if they needed as much convincing. But I think that people like Trump, who are not in that space, needed convincing. I don't think he wanted it. And the really interesting thing is that once it happened, he kept tweeting things like, open up immediately. We need to open up. He's the president of the United States. So clearly he did not have any power at that point to do what he wanted to do.
But Debbie, just before you joined, Peter made an interesting point saying that he's not certain that Trump or the president of the US can lock down the entire country, but that feeds into what you've been investigating about the DoD basically taking over.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I missed the first part of what you said.
Well, no, I mean, what I'm just saying from a point of law, because of the political structure of the United States, I'm not sure that there could be a presidential order of shutting down the entire state. That would be contested. Okay, that's why we got so much focus. I mean, even to this day, was it a good governor or a bad governor during COVID? Okay, like I said, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but but then the three letters popped out of Jeremy's mouth, DOD. Now you go into kind of a gray area, okay, of national security. So take it away, Debbie.
Yeah, so he can't shut down the whole country unless he, I guess, declares martial law or something like that, which he didn't do. But what he did, which was unprecedented, was he declared the Stafford Act emergency in all 50 states at the same time. And the Stafford Act is intended for natural disasters. So it's never affects all 50 states at the same time. At least it never has in the history ever since it has been a thing. And so that was the unprecedented move that he made in order to declare, I mean, it's to release funds and to secure, FEMA. So FEMA is in charge of emergencies that are Stafford Act emergencies. Now, FEMA became the lead federal agency for the COVID response, which they didn't tell anybody, and HHS was taken off of it on March 18th. On March 13th, the emergencies were declared. HHS is in charge. This is a public health emergency. We're going to deal with it the way it actually is written in the law that we should deal with it. 5 days later, FEMA's in charge. Now, FEMA is under the Department of Homeland Security. So basically, essentially, the Department of Homeland Security is in charge, and the Department of Defense is in charge in the sense that they are in charge of Operation Warp Speed. And they are providing logistical support to the states in all kinds of interesting ways. And what happened with the states was there is a law, and I can't remember the name of it, it's very long, which is intended for emergencies involving CBRN attacks. So the entire COVID response was enacted as a response to a CBRN attack. Every law that was invoked, every emergency declaration that was used was intended, especially EUA and the PrEP Act, for a response to a chemical, nuclear, radiological, or biological
but Debbie,
occurring pandemic.
You forgot an important word: medical.
Yeah, nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found.
And just by the way, Peter, Debbie's work is corroborated by somebody by the name of Sasha Ladipova. Am I correct, Debbie?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Sasha, yeah, our work dovetails because I was looking at the governing structure of the pandemic response, and she was looking at the how the vaccines were, what the contracts were, who signed the contracts, what did they say, and then who was in charge of the actual Operation Warp Speed.
So who were Matt Pottinger and Deborah Birx?
So Matt Pottinger and Deborah Birx are part of the national security state that was involved in the COVID response, and they had roles that sort of liaised between the politicians and the national security state. So Deborah Birx was appointed on February 27th, 2020, to be all of a sudden, out of the blue, the head of the coordinator of the task force. The COVID task force, if you look at the chart in the planning document of the pandemic response of the United States, is above everything else on the org chart for the pandemic response. So they were in charge of everything, the task force, not HHS, not CDC, not anything like that, not even FEMA. And so Deborah Birx was brought in by the Department of Homeland Security. She was working with she was the AIDS ambassador to Africa, and she was working with USAID, which is known to be a CIA cutout that goes into all kinds of other countries and uses public health as a way to do various things in those countries. And so she was in charge of that in Africa. They flew her back and she took over. And her role was to be the coordinator. Whenever you hear her being interviewed and she says, well, people accuse me of being the one who shut down. They accuse me of doing this. I didn't do anything. I didn't make any policy. I was just the coordinator. That is correct. She was not just like Fauci. She didn't make the policy, but she went around and enforced it. And she was the public face of the National Security Council, which was in charge of policy. And the National Security Council, through her, implemented their policy by making her the head of the task force. And she actually, it's very interesting, Peter, because she went around to the states and she actually talked to all the governors and she helped them implement whatever emergencies they needed to implement the laws in order to usurp utter control. I mean, so what they did was not constitutional. It was not constitutional. The fact that it has not been challenged in any state is astonishing, because what they did was they took these emergency declarations that are intended for CBRN attacks. Okay, so they're intended for very local and time limited and location limited attacks, which is when you want the authorities to take control and maybe lock down something for a week until they can figure out what's going on, make sure nobody goes in and out of the lockdown area. We can even question that. I mean, I would question the constitutionality even of that. But let's say that's the absolute outer limit of what we allow in terms of usurping the liberties of the citizens of the states. So they took that and they expanded it to include the whole state for as long as they wanted it to be enforced, which is over a year. And that gave the governors unlimited power to do whatever they wanted. Now, Deborah Birx was very instrumental in getting that done in as many states as possible.
She had more power than Trump.
Say that again?
She had more power than Trump.
Way more. He had no power. He had zero power.
Was that by design?
By design. Yeah, by design. So by design.
They didn't want him to play a role in it? Because the only role that, I mean, looking at him like right before you came on, he was standing next to Fauci day in and day out, and answering questions he had no business answering. It looked very much like he was in control. That was the public view of it.
But that's how he likes it.
Yeah.
They dovetailed together. Yes, they do.
Very easily played, right? We know that because if you play on his ego and on his desire to do the right thing, what he thinks he's going to get the most praise for, he will do it. I actually think at that point, I mean, so Scott Atlas wrote a book about his time on the task force. Now, he only got on the task force in August, so that was after everything was already done. And he did not get an inside look into the task force. He got a look at sort of like what the external publicly facing task force was doing. And what they were doing was they were talking about lockdowns and about vaccines, and they weren't talking about public health. And he was absolutely astonished at how awful, how contrary to medicine, science, and public health all of their policies were. And his book is fantastic because he wrote, it's called A Plague Upon Our House, I think, or A Plague Upon Their House. And he actually describes like sort of item by item everything that they did that was counter to public health. And that when
Debbie, if it wasn't about public health, then what was it about?
So it was about a global public-private partnership, which is a global structure that includes hundreds, if not thousands, of companies and organizations and NGOs and nonprofits in every country. I'm for sure Five Eyes and NATO countries. So the military and intelligence alliances were the thing that those were the instruments through which the response was coordinated. And we know now, thanks to a politician in Holland, we actually have a statement of her saying that when the Dutch government was responding to COVID, they were following NATO orders. NATO is a military alliance. It's a military alliance. It has absolutely nothing to do with public health and shouldn't have anything to do with public health. The Five Eyes, which is all the Anglosphere, except for where Germ is, They coordinated through some memoranda of understanding that have to do with biological weapons. So it was all about biological weapons. Whether or not they believed that this was a potential bioweapon, which I think maybe some people did believe, maybe some people thought it was dangerous, maybe they didn't. It doesn't really matter, because the structure that's in place on a global level is a partnership between, and for biodefense, it's between the global pharmaceutical industry and all of their subsidiaries. So that is literally thousands of companies and their suppliers, and all of the NGOs like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Wellcome Trust. Those are the two biggest ones that support, that benefit from that, and that support that. So they're kind of the lead, they are the middle people between the industry and the governments. Now, when I say governments, national governments are very much less powerful now than they used to be. One could argue that nation states are dissolving as far as sovereignty goes and as far as governance goes, and that really where the governance is happening right now is on a global level at the UN, and at the for this particular event at the WHO, which is a part of the UN, and that some of the planning goes on at the advisory global organizations like the WEF. So the WEF is not officially a governance organization, but it is the advisor to the governing bodies at the international level. And so they did a lot of advising. They also do a lot of coordinating. So it's a huge, giant monster structure. It's not one person. It's not one group of people. We can't get rid of Bill Gates.
It's a framework.
Go away. We can't get rid of Fauci and it'll go away. We can't get rid of Deborah Birx and Matt Pottinger and it'll go away. It won't go away. It will go away if we decide that there is some kind of other structure that we prefer, let's say a nation state, or let's say a religious group, or whatever it is, and the values of that group have to be counter to the values of the global public partnership, which is capitalism, global capitalism. So, or you might want to call it corporatism. People don't like it when I say bad things about it.
I mean, Debbie, John Laughlin has just joined us. John Laughlin is always the smartest man in the room, so I'm going to ask before he does. Okay. I've always had the impression this was like a dry run to subjugate the nation state, to empower these non-democratic institutions. You had someone that you could easily hoodwink in the White House. That was a big plus, okay? Because if there was going to be any upside, well, let him cheer all about him. It's his vaccine, all of this. But that's all beside the point. This was an endeavor. I think it largely succeeded in achieving its goals and using public health. I mean, I'm not a doctor. None of us are doctors. They use these long words I can't pronounce. Okay. I'm a well-educated person too. Okay. But I just don't have knowledge in that area. And all of us did things that we never would do under normal circumstances. For me personally, this was a beta test for something else. Am I being conspiratorial, Debbie?
Absolutely not. I do think so. I would say yes, beta test, or the first of many sort of global actions, emergencies, reasons for these big global conglomerates to take over. And it certainly advanced their cause in many ways. It also might have been a mistake. So that would be our hope. It was a mistake because, like I said, 5 years ago, I wouldn't be interested in this and I wouldn't be talking about this. And there's a lot of people like us here in this room. I mean, you guys were probably into it a lot before I was, but people like me who only woke up with COVID, it woke us up. So we figured out that something was going on. And I think there's a lot of people like me who know that it's happening, and I think hopefully won't go along with it, or we'll try to expose it. Yeah.
Okay, so just to kind of package what you're saying, what happened in the White House was effectively a public-private partnership framework mixed with a military operation disguised as a biological event.
Disguised as a public health event. Yeah. Now the mixing in of the military. So what's happening with globalism, right, is that the United States security state, which now no longer has any opposition, right, ever since the fall of communism. So these are these trends. And what I'm saying, I don't want to take credit for anything that I'm saying. There's much smarter people who have been working on this for much longer that I have learned these things from. Okay, so my favorite commentator right now is C.J. Hopkins, and he writes about what he calls global cap, which is when the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc fell, there was no longer anything, any ideological or geographical or political opposition to, I'm going to call it capitalism, global capitalism. So not the ideal of capitalism that we all know and love that is part of a democratic system, but global capitalism, which is not checked by anything. It is just turning the entire world into a market. Everything is, we are all part of a global market right now. And what COVID showed us is that our bodies are also part of that market. And so because if there's no foreign enemy to fight and to make trillions of dollars off of, so they're still trying, in Ukraine, and they're still doing it in the Middle East, and they're going to start as many, of those kinds of wars as they can. But overall, where the money is and where the power is us. It's us being completely, it's our data, both our health data and just in general, are where we are and what we're doing and what we're saying and where we're going on the internet. And it's also us as bodies in the sense that they can extract information, and they can also force us to take all kinds of things like vaccines or whatever they call it, whatever kinds of products they want to impose on us. So we have become part of that global marketplace.
Peter, your microphone is off.
But you gave us a ray of hope that you didn't think it succeeded in the way they had hoped.
So yeah, so the ray of hope, I hope. I mean, I always try to find a ray of hope because it's so scary when I think about it. I think because more of us woke up to it, and many more of us are aware of what's going on, or at least partially, we're trying to figure out what's going on. When it happens again, which as you said, I mean, this was just a trial run. So they're going to have, I don't think it's going to be a public health emergency next time. I think next time it's going to be a climate emergency. It's going to be a cyber pandemic where they have to shut down the internet and like bring it back in a way where we're all then have to be registered in order to participate, that kind of thing. Or it might be all of the above. There's a lot of elements in this whole global conglomerate, and they're all doing their own thing. The biodefense people are still like talking about viruses, while other people are talking about the threat of cyber pandemics, which, by the way, NATO recently included cyber attacks in their mutual defense agreement. I think that's pretty indicative and pretty scary. Because now a cyber attack on one is a cyber attack on all, and it doesn't just stay in the cyberspace. Actually, it says in the agreement, it's not just in the cyberspace. It could also be in the physical world that we respond to a cyber attack on one of our NATO partners or whatever. So that's scary. So the optimism, or the hope, is that now that all of us are talking about it and people are talking about it all over the world, hopefully we'll have enough of a network so that when these things happen, even if we can't stop them, we can have enough of a critical mass to resist them, to expose them. I don't know. I hope so.
John, our head of Forum for Democracy International, jump in.
Yes, I've only just joined, as you know, and I'm listening with great interest. Debbie, do you know the work of David Hughes, an English academic who has written about this and who argues very firmly that the pandemic measures were indeed a conspiracy to impose world capitalism? Are you familiar with his work? We should have him on, actually, as a guest. Debbie.
I am. He is, so I'm a Brownstone Institute fellow. He has recently also become a Brownstone Institute fellow. I haven't spoken with him, but I've read parts of his book, not the whole thing. I think he's done amazing work. I don't agree with his interpretation of the scientific. So he kind of accepts the transhumanist agenda as being real, and I don't. I think the transhumanist agenda is a product of ignorance and hubris. Those are my two favorite words to describe the people who are doing that. I think they are extremely ignorant because they are computer people and they understand digital stuff, and they think that the digital world is analogous in some way to the physical biological world, which is not analogous in any way whatsoever. And they also think that they can explain everything using analogies that they take from the tech world, which is also a huge simplification. So they oversimplify everything. They think that they can implant computer chips or whatever they, can connect us to an internet of bodies. I don't believe any of that. And I know that that John Hughes does, or at least he presents that as
David Hughes.
David Hughes. That he presents that as one of the dangers. I don't believe that's the danger. I think the danger is using the technology that they have in order to control us. That's basically the danger that we have to worry about.
And I get the feeling that Elon Musk. Sorry, go on, John. No,
I was just going to say, Debbie, you said a moment ago people are going to wake up next time and there will be greater awareness. That may well be true. But on the other hand, the awareness isn't nearly as great as it should be, is it? I mean, even though we've had the United States, I think the House of Representatives committee report, perhaps you referred to this already, making a number of statements about the vaccines and the lockdown measures and so on, it still hasn't really made the front pages, has it? And the whole issue around vaccines hasn't either. I mean, I'm always skeptical. I asked that question, give you a bit of background. I'm always skeptical about the idea that the people will somehow, rise up and bring the powerful to account. Perhaps I'm just being cynical. But I think I detect you agree with me, Debbie, when you say that people haven't woken up enough, even though there are now many reasons, including official reports like the one I've referred to. Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Yeah, when I say more people have woken up, I don't mean the public. The censorship and the propaganda. So the thing that scared me the most about the pandemic was the censorship and propaganda and how successful they were. I did not think in my lifetime, given what we know about the censorship and propaganda in the 20th century totalitarian, on both sides, on the Nazis and the communists, like they were very, very good at propaganda. We all know about it. We all learned about it. We're like, we're not like that. 1984, not here. Then it happened and 1984 is here. And people don't even realize it because that's how good the propaganda and the censorship are. So I absolutely agree with you. I think what I meant by waking up is people like us or like me. So if you guys were always conspiracy theorists and you were, 0.1% of the population, and now more of us, like 5% of the population has realized what's going on, that's a step forward, I think.
The term conspiracy theorist, though, was weaponized by the CIA. Did you know that?
I know. When I say conspiracy theory, you know what I mean. I'm owning it. I know it was by the CIA. I know they...
Yeah, but one of the interesting outcomes of all of this, and I'm tending to agree with you, is one of the findings of this operation, because I believe it was, now they know who to target. They know who we are because we stuck our head out, okay? And that's an interesting positive positive asset that they can put in play anytime they want, because I'm naturally skeptical. All of us are naturally skeptical. I don't know. I think I'll go to prison before they wear a mask again. I just, no way. I'm not going to humiliate myself again. That's it. That was part of it too, watching us all humiliate ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, using the power and making sure that you don't stand up. That's interesting what you say. I mean, I don't even want to think about what you just said, because what you just said is true. Because now, even though more of us...
Debbie, I say it because I am targeted all of the time. Okay. I already know what it feels like. Yeah.
And so many people do. And so many people have been targeted. So when I say my hope is that some of the people who are targeted and who are speaking out and who are known in this space are making more people aware who aren't necessarily as known in this space. So my big effort in my life is, I think we need not just virtual, but we need actual physical contact with people who are, interested and want to know what's going on. And so Brownstone has supper clubs, which is where we meet once a month, and I have one now in Philadelphia where I live. And so just having small groups of people in the real world who are getting together. So they're a little bit under the radar. And you're right. If they want to crush us, they'll crush us.
Debbie, Trump is an enigma of sorts. I mean, I think everybody's got some sort of love-hate relationship with him. There's parts of him that you love because you really enjoy how he derails the media, but then he does stupid things like the beautiful vaccine and is this weird kind of polarizing person. Do you think perhaps that part of the operation under Birx et al. Was to have him removed and put in more of a yes man in 2020?
Well, so the interesting thing is that the Robert Koch Institute, not the files, the leak. So there was the files, they were more redacted. Now we have a leak with less redacted documents from Germany. One of the documents says that it would be undesirable for the vaccines to come out in the United States or in Europe before November 2020. So on a global level, somebody thought, and now I'm going to say my conjecture based on who was running things, the NATO, whoever was in charge in the NATO space of what was happening, said, we don't want the vaccines to come out. So in the United States, we are very American-centric, and we think it was the American sort of security state or whatever that was plotting against Trump. It wasn't. It was a more global plot in the sense that, yes, they didn't want him to be able to take credit for Operation Warp Speed. What a thing to take credit for. I mean, it's horrible. He should have come out against it, and he should be the one who's screaming about it now. So I'm very skeptical about his new, about what's going to happen. But they definitely used it. So some people think that all of COVID was just a ruse to get Trump out of office. No, it was absolutely 100% not. That is a very US-centric, and it is a very narrow interpretation. Yes, that was one thing that they thought they could accomplish. There were so many agendas that were piled onto COVID. That was one of the agendas. Let's get Trump out of office. Let's get somebody else in there who's a zombie, who's not even a functional human being, as we know. Who's our president? I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. The Democrats don't care. I was a Democrat, so I was a liberal Democrat all my life, and with Biden, and now I'm not anymore. But I asked my liberal Democrat friends, "Who's our president?" And who has been our president for the last few years? That he's not functional, and they say it doesn't matter who the president is.
But that's quite profound, Debbie, because if Joe Biden was the president of the United States of America and everybody knows that he wasn't running the show, who was running the show, and what makes anybody therefore think that Trump will run the show?
Precisely. That is
essentially. Do we need a president of the United States? That's the question that's being asked.
Well, the question that they're posing, that the propaganda and censorship industrial complex is posing, is, do we really need a president? And their answer is no. And so when I talk to my liberal Democratic friends, I hear them parroting whatever the messages are that they're getting from the corporate media, which is the propaganda arm of the military industrial complex. So they're getting the propaganda that says it doesn't matter who the president is. He's just a figurehead anyway. And he just has to have good people around him. And then I asked them, and by the way, Jerm, I just want to make a point here. It's not who was president when Biden was president. Who is president today? Who is president today? We
But,
don't.
I mean, Debbie, there could be a wrinkle here, a fly in the ointment. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., very interesting character, fascinated by many things he says. Other things, I think he's nuts. But because of COVID, I think, and because of his entire history in dealing with the healthcare and medical community, he is a threat. He definitely is a threat, and he understands probably better than anyone in the public sphere that I know. He knows the history of COVID. Okay, now if that's going to be translated into better policy, we don't know. I tend to doubt he will be confirmed, but that's, this is one of the ripple effects. Somebody like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. suddenly is in the spotlight for the very reasons that we have such disquiet about what happened with COVID.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I like you, I take bets on whether he's going to be confirmed or not. And I think that it's a mistake to go into the administration, any administration, and try to quietly not say what you want to say and work from the inside. If you want to go into the administration saying exactly what needs to happen. And that's not what he's doing. And I know it's a strategy, and everybody's going along with the strategy, but right now he has the stage, he has the microphone. When he's in the administration, if he ever gets in, he's going to have, people don't understand, like much less power, because he's going to be subsumed into the bureaucracy. Right now is the last chance that he has to say, we need to withdraw the mRNA products right now. They are killing people. They are doing experiments on people with the mRNA products. There are hundreds of clinical trials going on for every virus, for cancers, for God only knows what. The RSV vaccine for children, just got, the experiment just got stopped. But it's a dangerous thing that's happening right now, like a clear and present danger. And he could go out and say, forget all the other vaccines. We can talk about the childhood vaccine schedule later. We should. But right now, what needs to happen is we need to pull these things from the market immediately. And now he has the stage to say that. If that means he's not confirmed, he will at least have saved some people's lives. And since I don't think he's going to be confirmed anyway, or even if he's confirmed, he's going to be completely, subsumed by the whole bureaucracy that he's going to be a part of. And I think he's great. And I think on a lot of things. And I think that he does understand, but I don't think he understands how little power he has, because he's a Kennedy. And he made, in my mind, 3 mistakes. First, he tried to run as a Democrat. That was an absurd thing to do. Really absurd. I mean, the waste of time, money, and energy of him running as a Democrat is hard to understand. Why did he do it? I think because he's grown up as part of a political dynasty in this country, and he doesn't understand how little power he has. 2, he tried to run as an independent. So first, he trusted the Democratic Party. I have no idea why. Anybody could have told him that that was a mistake, but he's been a Democrat all his life. The Kennedys are Democrats, so he's going to do something stupid. Then he trusted democracy, because he thought, oh, well, I'm going to run as a third party and they're going to let me do it. Unbelievably stupid. I mean, I just can't even, I'm sorry to say stupid, but it just seems like such a miscalculation, waste of time and money again. Then finally, he's like, okay, well, I can't run at all. So I'm going to join Trump. I think that's a third mistake, personally, but we'll see what happens.
What about Elon, by the way? What do you make of
and have
his...
you discussed? Sorry, I'm so sorry. I've got a slight delay. Have you on the connection? Have you? Sorry to ask this if you've already discussed it, but have you tackled the question of how much power Trump will have vis-a-vis the deep state? Have you already tackled that, perhaps in the first part of the discussion?
Well, John saves the best questions for last, doesn't he?
So, yeah, I mean, that is the question, right? But I think, Jerm, you just said what the big, and I think this is absolutely exactly the question. If we know that the person who was supposed to be the president for the last few years was incapacitated and had no power, and that's the position that Trump is stepping into. He is stepping into a position that has been demonstrated for several years now, if not for decades, to have no power. So that's kind of a empirical demonstration. As far as vis-a-vis the deep state, I think the deep state is not a monolithic thing. If you look at the assassination attempt, which I, as a conspiracy theorist, believe was not done by the guy on the roof. And I think there might be factions in the deep state that wanted Trump dead, and there might be factions that not, and there might be who knows what. I mean, I don't know what's going on in there, but none of them are on Trump's side. They're going to use Trump for whatever they need him for. Maybe for some, it would be better if he's not in office. Maybe for others, it would be better if he is in office. I think basically they hedge their bets, and they have plan A, plan B, plan C, plan Z, you know, depending on what happens in the world and how they are or are not able to manipulate events.
And what plan does Trump have? Because he's announced his desire to see off the deep state. What plan does he have? You said Robert Kennedy doesn't have a plan. What plan does Trump have?
I mean,
we know they've got plans against him.
They might have plans. I don't think that Trump has any plan at all, because he's surrounded himself with a whole bunch of, you know, globalists,
technocrats,
globalists.
No, I will be less kind. Zeros. Okay.
Well, what do you make of Elon, by the way? It's not entirely related, but Elon is always a character that needs to be, you know, interrogated, and he's now pretty much Trump's right-hand man.
Yeah, I'm not a big Elon fan. I think
the good thing we can only hope for is that Trump will say, you know, you've overstayed your welcome at Mar-a-Lago, because I still think he's living there. I
don't even know.
This is the most bizarre bromance ever. It's amazing. I think you have to go back to the Byzantine Empire for this type of thing. Go ahead.
That's interesting. I mean, I think in that situation, it's so clear who has the power, and it's not Trump. And so as far as bromances go, I think Trump is always enthralled to somebody who has more money and power than him, both of which Elon has. And I think Elon is absolutely happy to manipulate Trump in whatever way he needs to manipulate him in order to further the interests of his global military operations, of which his entire company and his entire existence.
Well, I mean, but Elon's fortune is essentially government contracts. Exactly. So, I mean, I cannot see him as being some kind of third rail. As a matter of fact, just the opposite. I mean, he wants the American state or Western globalism to pick winners and losers. It has nothing to do about competition.
That's right.
That's a very good Freudian slip there, Luna. I mean, he has spoken about the moon, actually.
I also, by the way, when I say ignorance and hubris, I think he is the poster child for both of those things.
But what do you make of Doge? I mean, that's quite dodgy.
Yes, Doge is dodgy. I mean, again, it's exactly what Peter was saying. It's just, they're going to use the state as an instrument. You know, they're going to get rid of what they want, and they're going to use what they need. And they're going to, you know, I think I laughed actually when I heard that they said, oh, we're going to cut $2 trillion. I thought, like, so what? So what? What does that mean? What does that do? That does absolutely nothing. You're doing nothing. You're not addressing any issue. You're not addressing which part. You know, yeah, anybody can cut $2 trillion. You can fire half the government employees. My analogy is, if you have a cancer, which I would describe, again, it sounds so technical and so boring, but the public-private partnerships, if you have a cancer all over your body and it's in all of your organs, and you say, okay, I'm going to come out and I'm going to cut 10% of that cancer out. It is a malignant cancer. Cutting 10% out of it doesn't do anything except damage whichever parts of the body you sort of have to cut through when you're taking out that 10%. The rest of it is still there and it's still spreading. And all you did was just do some damage to the body and pretend that you were actually doing something. So, and that's in a benign sense. They might actually want to take out some of the organs, and they might actually want to take out some of the things that are essential to the body in the whole process of pretending that they're cutting, spending or whatever. Cutting spending is fine, but you don't just cut spending for the sake of cutting spending. You cut spending for the sake of, reestablishing, democratic norms, or, severing the ties between the global governing structures and there's many ways that you can go about it, but they haven't described any ideology or any political understanding or theory behind their $2 trillion proposed cuts. They think, well, all government is bad, and so we're just going to find $2 trillion and we're just going to cut it.
Debbie, do you think there'll ever be a reckoning for COVID? Will anyone be held accountable, held responsible?
No, because there's no person that you can point to. You can put Fauci on trial. A lot of them committed crimes, of course. Big crimes were committed, but they were committed by a giant conglomerate. And so you would have to find the people at the level of NATO and the UN who sat in a room or who had a conversation and said, okay, this is the one we're going to use, because, they were poised for this, right? COVID would have happened whether it was that particular virus or some other virus or some other pathogen or some other excuse. And so they the people who said, okay, this is the one that we're going to use, and this is how we're going to do it right now. I don't even know who those people are. I have long lists of people in every country that participated who committed all kinds of crimes.
But the thing, to feed into what you're saying, Debbie, is, here in South Africa, we're not part of NATO. And yet, when the whole thing rolled out in early 2020, it wasn't just a military operation in the US. We had military on our streets, driving around with weapons, telling people to stay in their houses. Yeah. Same thing was happening in Italy, for example. We've seen all the photographs and the footage of the military all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Italy is part of NATO. And South Africa is, as we talked about, actually, I think, I'm sure that there are military intelligence alliances that include South Africa. In the Anglo world or I don't even know, because I'm not an expert on these agreements, and I'm not even an expert on NATO, and it scares me to even say the words NATO, because NATO isn't something that should have anything to do with public health or pandemics or anything like that. So the fact that NATO was involved, to me, is just super scary, because it means that on the national level, people were taking orders, military orders, I believe in South Africa as well, from some kind of global group that was running things.
And you can't point to them, because they'll just say, I'm just doing my job.
Right. Yeah, and even Fauci can say that. So Fauci wasn't in charge, right? Fauci was the public relations person for the biodefense industrial complex. He was their public relations guy, right? He was the science. He didn't make the decisions. He absolutely 100% did not make any decision regarding COVID policy. So therefore, you could have a Nuremberg trial and you could say, well, why did you enforce those things? You knew they were bad. He'll say, well, I didn't do it. It wasn't my decision. Deborah Birx has plausible deniability. She can say, I didn't make the decisions. I was just the coordinator. So everybody that we see who's public facing in terms of this event, all the public facing people have plausible deniability. I'm going to mention some people like Christian Drosten. Do you guys know who that is?
Yeah.
So he is if I had to name one of the top 5 sort of COVID criminals, he would be at the top. He is a very evil man and scary. And he is part of the German biodefense industrial complex. But he, of course, they all work on an international, in an international group. He was in charge of the PCR test. So he came up with a PCR test for COVID like 2 seconds after the sequence supposedly first came out. Clearly, everybody had the sequence before. He also, the paper which he used to validate the PCR test was pushed through peer review in less than 24 hours. Can't happen.
At the WHO.
Doesn't happen. no such thing. The person who pointed that out, oh my gosh, now I'm going to forget his name. But anyway, a very brave person who just pointed out that there's no way that this could have undergone scientific review in that amount of time, was harassed.
Simon Goddick.
Smeared. Say that again.
Simon Goddick.
Simon Goddick. Thank you. One of my heroes. He was smeared, and he was vilified and harassed and then fired. And he now lives in the Amazon and is on like a self-sustaining farm because he just had to get away because he could not participate anymore. And he's a very accomplished microbiologist, who was studying all kinds of stuff. And he was hounded by Drosten. And anybody who says anything against him, writes anything against him, or speaks out against him is in big trouble.
There was
I'm just naming a name that people don't know. Who is very, very key to everything that happened.
But Debbie, there was a paper written in late 2020, I think it was, by about 24 or 25 scientists. It was called the Corman-Drosten Review, and they submitted it to a huge European journal called Eurosurveillance, criticizing Drosten's PCR protocol, and it was completely rejected.
Yep. I mean, if you look at the number of papers that were retracted, I just read an article about this recently. The number of papers during COVID that were retracted is in the hundreds, retracted all in a completely unprecedented, unscientific, and unprofessional way. So they would even get on the pre-print, server. People would look at them the minute they got generated interest, and it was about anything from the PCR test and how ridiculous it was to the vaccines and the side effects, anything like that, or hydroxychloroquine, or ivermectin, or hospital kill protocols, anything like that. Once it got onto a preprint, even before, it would get retracted, and there's hundreds of them that got retracted in that same way. So the global biodefense public-private partnership absolutely encompasses all of the academic institutions and journals and peer review boards, which are all one and the same with the pharmaceutical companies. So,
which obviously gives the lie to the slogan at the time, "Trust the science." Debbie, we're going to have to wrap up. We've reached the top of the hour. In fact, we've gone slightly over. It's been absolutely fascinating listening to you. I'm very sorry that I was unable to join you for the first part, but thank you very much, Jeremy Nell, for kicking off, and Peter for holding the fort while I was still in a plane. Thank you all, and we hope to have you back at some point in the future, Debbie, if you're so kind to give us your time. Thank you very much. Thanks to all our listeners, and we'll take a Christmas break, and we'll see you all and our listeners on the 8th of January. All the best. Bye.
Bye.